So 14 hours before you're ready to bake your bread, you want to take your bread bag with all the ingredients in it. Just put it in a bowl. For this loaf, we have cinnamon sugar. And I'll measure out a cup and a half of water. And you'll want to use a dry measure. These are dry measures, not one of these glass measuring cups because they can be inaccurate. And I'll take 1.5 cups minus a tablespoon of water. So I'm going to take a tablespoon of water out of there because the cinnamon and sugar does not need as much. So I'll just take a fork. And I want to keep working until I incorporate everything. Don't add any more water. This is all the water you'll need. And keep working it until you don't have any more dry bits of flour showing. And while this is setting for the next 14 hours, the gluten will be developing, and you should have a nice rise by the time your 14 hours is done. So there it is, it's all incorporated. And I'll cover it with saran wrap. Now sometimes during the winter time, your bread, even after 12 or 14 hours, it'll only be maybe like up to here. And this we just mixed up, but I'm going to show you that let's say after 6 hours, your bread doesn't look, to give it a really nice rise, we're going to just knead it a little bit. And what this does, it just develops the gluten in it so that you can either knead bread to develop gluten or you can just let it sit. And see, you can see the gluten developing, their gluten strands. And so you can do this 4 hours after you mix it up, or you can do it 8 hours, but you just don't want to do it right before you take it out to roll it into a bread dough or bread loaf. So 14 hours after you mix the initial dough, you're going to have your dough rising like this. You can see that you have a lot of little air bubbles, and it's pretty high. And now it's going to be time to roll out my cinnamon loaf, my cinnamon sugar loaf. So I'm going to put some flour on my cutting board. Make sure it's nice and floured because this is a pretty wet dough. Okay. I'm going to use a little water on my fingers so it doesn't stick so much. Otherwise, you'll have dough all over your hands. And I'm not going to be flattening out the dough. I'm going to keep those air bubbles, try to keep those air bubbles in there. So I'm not going to knead this at all. Okay, I'm going to spread that out. And for this loaf, I'm going to be making, I'm going to be baking in a loaf pan, not a round loaf. So I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm going to take about 1/4 cup to 1/3 cup of cinnamon sugar and put that on there until the surface is covered. Okay. Now it's not perfect, but that's fine. I'm going to roll this up. And you can see how long it's going to be, but I'm going to fold those ends underneath. There's a fold, and there's a fold. And I kind of tuck in the inside, so it's all nice and neat, and there's not going to be any of the cinnamon and sugar leaking out. I'm going to transfer it into the parchment paper, and then into a loaf pan. Now when I put this into the loaf pan, I'm not going to just leave it like that. I'm going to try to make it, the paper, make creases or try to conform it to the loaf pan so you don't have the parchment paper digging into the loaf because then that just makes it look kind of ugly. So this is a little bit cleaner. There we go. Now I'm going to put another loaf pan on top of that, and this is what I'm going to be baking my loaf in. And the cinnamon sugar loaf is baked at 425 degrees. You do not need to preheat a pot for this. All you would need to do is put this in the oven at 425 degrees and bake like we normally bake.